Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic book fans from all over the world, welcome to another thought-provoking, incisive, curiosity-satisfying, revelationary episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, Chuck Dixon, a comic book professional, comic book writer of long standing, about what I do for a living. What I do for a living is I write comic books. While I got you here, Something Big is a series that Frank Fosco and I worked on, a limited series we're real happy about. Science fiction epic, a sort of mashup of a alien invasion story with a classic heist thriller. And I think you'll dig it. We're both very proud of it. And it is available now at Castalia or Archaven, or you can go to Amazon. And all 4 issues. These are oversized paperbacks, like magazine-sized paperbacks with card covers. And this is the whole epic, all 4 volumes, ready for you to read. And I'd appreciate it if you'd pick it up, and I know you'll enjoy it. Now, on to our questions. Jamal Sadler. I've been reading your Nightwing 1. I've been reading your Nightwing run, and it made me think, if you were approached by DC, would you have taken on the task of writing Azrael? Probably not. It's a fascinating character, and I would have loved to have written some Azrael. I mean, I obviously got to write some Jean-Paul Vallée during Nightfall, but I never wrote about the Azrael character specifically. And that would have been cool, except that was Denny O'Neil's baby. Azrael was his boy, and also Azrael was Denny O'Neil's retirement plan. When Denny retired as editor, group editor on Batman, and became a freelancer again, he had a deal with DC, one of those many sweetheart deals I talk about that DC's willing to make with certain creators. And his deal was that Azrael would run for 100 issues no matter what the sales were like. DC would publish 100 issues. So even if the sales cratered and no one was buying it and no one was reading it, DC would continue publishing it. And that was Denny's golden parachute. Because if you learn anything about DC Comics or Warner's, everything is transactional. That they won't ever give you anything unless they get something in return. So rather than have a pension or retirement plan, official retirement plan or anything like that, Denny quite wisely and sagely arranged for his own plan and made it within the confines of DC Publishing, and everybody was happy. And we got 100 issues of Azrael. We got Denny O'Neil's swan song, his fond farewell to the comic books industry. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to get near the character because it was understandably exclusively Denny's domain. But it would have been interesting. It would have been interesting. I like and dislike the character, which makes it fascinating to me. I don't dislike him as a character. I don't dislike him as a creation. I dislike him because you're supposed to dislike him. He's not. Jean-Paul Vallée was a weak, flawed character, perfect Denny character, and for that reason he'd be pretty cool to write. Kieran Brunkard asks, why do heroes like Superman and Batman wear trunks on the outside? Do the trunks have any significant meaning? Is there any big deal when they are removed, especially in modern media like the movies? I don't think there's any real significance, but the classic look of Batman and Superman and all superheroes of the period who were wearing tights was to have this underwear. And I think a lot of it was so that you would know they weren't naked. And you could reprint the comic books in black and white and they're not naked. And it just became an intrinsic design to every superhero character from, the Phantom wore trunks onward. And, Captain America, Human Torch, everybody. Fantastic Four in their initial appearances. And the reason it's been explained to me for this phenomenon of wearing the underwear on the outside was that many of the superhero costumes were designed based on costumes that were worn by athletes, Olympic athletes, Olympic gymnasts, professional wrestlers, weightlifters, things like that, that they would wear these layered costumes. And trapeze artists in particular would wear tights, and they would wear underwear, and on the outside of a different color. And it's as simple as that. That's how it is generally theorized, that that's the reason that these superheroes were super athletes, and that kids would recognize or relate to them in that way. And, you know, it shows off their physiques and everything else, much like a weightlifter, much like a gymnast, much like an athlete, trapeze artist. You know, you can't wear street clothes and do those things. So there you have it. Ulysses. I'm rereading No Man's Land in trade paperback. I love it. It's almost like an anthology with a narrative through line. I love the variety in characters, locations, and creative teams. What was it like to work on No Man's Land? Creatively, was it an editorial top-down mandate, or was the idea pitched by writers and artists? Yeah, I didn't do a lot on No Man's Land. I really, in my time on as a regular Batman writer was officially over. I was fired from Detective Comics on the same day that Doug Moench was fired from Batman, and Alan Grant was fired from Shadow of the Bat. They were cleaning house because, you know, sales had dipped, and these things happen. But I stayed on. I was still, obviously, I was writing other titles. I was still writing Robin. I was still writing Nightwing. So I still had reasons to go to DC. I was still part of the Batman offices, and I did write. Doug and I were brought back to write some issues of Batman and Detective that led up to No Man's Land, what they called the road to No Man's Land. And when No Man's Land was presented, I wasn't officially part of the team, but I did manage to sneak in on one of the initial meetings. And at the time, it was a Jordan Gorfinkel run thing. Denny was still group editor. It was his final days as group editor, and but Jordan was running the show, and Bob Gale and Larry Hama were the main writers at the beginning of No Man's Land. Larry Hama would leave soon, as well as Bob Gale, and then other writers were brought on, and they were like late hires by Denny. So I really only contributed a little bit, and I don't think I think I didn't contribute more because my contributions weren't appreciated. I really didn't like the way No Man's Land was set up, and because I can't keep my mouth shut, I was pretty vocal about it at the first meeting. But by that time, art had been done. The stories are scripted, and the train had left the station, and it was way too late to kibitz about any of it. So I'm largely left out, and I agree. It is largely an anthology series. I mean, you have the high concept of basically Escape from New York version of Gotham, and then all the writers and artists did their various arcs. If there was a through story, I didn't identify it, but things were set up. Poison Ivy was going to have her part of the city, and this character and that character and the other character would all the city was divided up between the gangs and all the rest of it. My only really big contribution, other than writing a lot of the setup stories prior to No Man's Land, was they asked me to come in and do a Bane arc, which I did, and that was fun, and sort of showed what Bane was doing in the middle of all this, and Bane was doing what Bane always does, trying to be the top man in the hierarchy. He's always trying to be he always is the alpha predator. Him and Batman were the main opponents in No Man's Land, as far as I could see, and that's how I presented Bane as trying to rise to the very tippy top of the crime food chain. But that was really my only contribution to No Man's Land, major one anyway. JeffHarperComics.com. Are you the Charles Dixon that adapted The Hobbit, the graphic novel, for Eclipse? And if so, how did you get that gig? when I first got into comics, I credited myself as Charles Dixon because I thought it sounded more authorly. It was like more serious. It was Cat Ironwood who began crediting me as Chuck Dixon because nobody calls me Charles, and she started putting Chuck Dixon in the credits of Airboy, and so I just abandoned the whole Charles Dixon thing because I didn't want a lot of confusion. But when I was approached to adapt The Hobbit, I said, please let's credit it to Charles Dixon, because Chuck Dixon sounds like a sports writer. I mean, Batman by Chuck Dixon's okay. The Hobbit by Chuck Dixon sounds like, there's something wrong. That guy shouldn't be writing The Hobbit. He has no business anywhere near this. Now, how did I get the gig? Well, even more interesting is how the gig came about. I've told the story before, but apparently not all of you have heard it. Dean Mulaney had people or a guy who used to spend a lot of time at the Library of Congress, looking through the stacks. The Library of Congress is literally a library, and you can request to look at stuff. And in a lot of cases, it's, Library of Congress might have the only copy of something, some publication from God knows when. So if you want to see the real McCoy, the real Tabasco, you got to go to the American, Congressional Library. But what this guy was doing for Dean was looking for public domain material that Eclipse could exploit. And what this guy ran across, unbelievably, it's hard to believe this even existed, was an early manuscript of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien that had never been copyrighted. This was an actual manuscript. How in the world it ended up at the Library of Congress, I have no idea. But it was an early manuscript. It was significantly different from the finished work, and so could be considered a separate property, a separate work. Because it had never been copyrighted, of course, it was in public domain. And so Dean contacted me and asked if I would be willing, if I'd be interested. Had I read The Hobbit? I said, yes, I read The Hobbit. And would I be interested in adapting this this public domain version? And I said, yeah. So he sent me Xerox copies of it, and it was significantly different. And so I didn't feel any need to hew too closely to, I had to obviously avoid material that was in the finished version of The Hobbit. And so I was kind of free to, I had a lot of artistic license on it. And so in my mind, I thought of it as a classic Disney movie. And that's the way I began writing it. Well, I'm about 20 pages into the adaptation. It was set up to be a series of prestige paperbacks illustrated by Dave Wenzel. And so I'm about 15, 20 pages in. I get a call from Dean. And he says, stop what you're doing. He says, I have contacted the Tolkien estate, and they are they're willing to let us use the authorized version. And I said, well, how'd you work that? And he goes, well, Dean said, I kind of got them over a barrel, because I said, I've got this public domain version. We're going to do the comics, and you're not going to make any money from it. But if you allow us to use the authorized final draft of the Tolkien classic, then you'll make money too, and it'll sell like a house of fire. Well, the Tolkien estate whined and cried and screamed and yelled, and because they don't like comics. That's why there's never been a comic adaptation of Lord of the Rings. You know it would sell like a house of fire. But eventually they had to get, they saw the sense of what Dean was saying, and Dean is a very persuasive guy, the greatest guerrilla marketer ever in comics. I think this proves it. This story proves it. And he convinced them to give in and agree that we could do the authorized version. And so Dean called me and said, get out your old paperback, your old Ballantine paperback, and start working from that. And I did. And that's why it's under Charles Dixon. That's how I got the gig, and I had a blast doing it. I had a lot of fun. To this day, it is the most successful thing I've ever worked on. This thing is a perennially in print. It is all around the world. Almost every language you can imagine, the graphic novel appears in, and it's a good little royalty payer. Twice a year, a substantial check comes from the Tolkien estate through the publishers in Britain, and people say, well, do you still like The Hobbit? Because you got to work on it, and you had to read it over and over. I had to read this book like 25 times, through, while I was working on it, because we didn't have all the comic book real estate that I would have wished to have had. This really should have been like a 200-page adaptation or more. I didn't have all the real estate. I had to cut a lot of stuff, which required really rereading and rereading the book to examine, what is essential to the plot line and what can we jettison. And I had to cut out my favorite character in all of Tolkien, Bjorn, the werebear. So, pity me. Don't cry for me. Middle Earth. Okay. Jason Shepard. Next month, June 20th, is the 50th anniversary of the release of Steven Spielberg's Jaws, the movie that launched the whole concept of the summer blockbuster. So here are some Jaws-related questions. Are you a fan of the movie? Yeah, I like the movie. I rewatched it recently. They've recently done a 4K restoration, and I like it. It's a classic thriller. It's a lot of great scenes, terrific acting. The only thing that makes me sad, I remember seeing it. I saw it that summer. By like August, it had hit the dollar theaters, and that's when I saw it. Back in the day, you didn't rush out to see things on opening weekend. That wasn't a thing until I think Star Wars really started, the having to see something on opening day. But I eventually saw it later that summer, and it was a phenomenon. It was a phenomenon. Even in August at a dollar theater, the theater was packed, and people went to see this movie over and over and over again. And that's how you create a blockbuster movie. If you see a movie at the theaters and it's doing extraordinarily well, that's not people going one time. That's people going over and over and over again to see it. So yeah, I dug it. I liked it. It was a good time at the movies. The only thing that makes me sad is that in later years, I never liked the Richard Dreyfuss character. I thought he was miscast. And in later years, I found out that Jeff Bridges was supposed to play that character, but broke his leg skiing and couldn't be in the feature, so they replaced him with Richard Dreyfuss. And also Sterling Hayden, as much as I love Robert Shaw's portrayal of Quint, Sterling Hayden was supposed to play Quint, but Hayden had all kinds of tax problems in the United States and could not return to the United States for as extended a shoot as Jaws was. He managed to sneak back into the United States to appear in Godfather, but that was just one scene. So, anyway, you get a twin spin because the Jaws questions continue. Jason Shepard again. Have you read the original novel by Peter Benchley? Books and movies are very different media, but I've always felt the movie is vastly superior. Getting to toss most of the book's soap opera plot lines allows for a much leaner, focused, intense story. What do you think? Yeah, I read the book in January of the year it was released. So I read the book like 6 months before the movie came out. Everybody knew the movie was coming. They kept talking about the movie. And if you've read anything about it, Jaws the book and Jaws the movie were all part of the same deal. Basically, Benchley presented this to his publishers as a concept. They presented it to Hollywood. They shopped around Hollywood while Benchley was writing the novel, and it was it was all baked in: the movie deal, the book deal, the hardcover release, the paperback release. And so I read the paperback. The paperback came out around Christmas time, and I bought it and read it in January. And oddly enough, I read it while recovering from wisdom tooth surgery. In other videos, I've alluded to my unusual dental anatomy as one dentist put it. And I had 5 wisdom teeth. I didn't have 4. I couldn't have anything easy. And one of the teeth, I know this has nothing to do with the movie, but it's my show. One of the teeth, its root was hooked up over my upper jaw. So it actually required me to go to the hospital and spend a couple of days while they yanked these things out and then checked on me until they released me. And I took Jaws along with me, and not realizing until I got to the hospital that, you know, taking Jaws to wisdom tooth surgery was kind of a living play on words. But yeah, I read the book. I enjoyed the book, but you're right. There's a lot of soap opera stuff in it. It veers off. You know, you know, 2 characters have an affair, and the story has absolutely nothing to do with any of it. But other stuff you may not know about Jaws was Jaws very closely follows a book by Cornell Woolrich called The Black Path of Fear, and doesn't feature a shark. It features a killer jaguar, and it's set in a Central American city where supposedly a jaguar is stalking its victims in the night and killing them. It's written by Cornell Woolrich. It's a great novel, and Cornell Woolrich was a crime writer, most famous for Rear Window. He wrote Rear Window. And the plot structure of it, I call this the first Jaws novel. The plot structure of it, it sets up the mysterious natural predator preying on unsuspecting human beings and the fear it causes and the eventual, you know, characters trying to hunt the creature down and all the rest of it. And this is really, as far as I know, or as far as I've read, is the very first experience of that kind of setup. The kind of setup that you see in Jaws, where there's a, you know, a natural, bestial antagonist taking out innocent people, and the community must respond to stop it. And then all the spooky suspense moments and all the rest of it. It's all in Black Path of Fear. I mean, if you laid the novels side by side structurally, you know, Jaws lays right on top of what Woolrich wrote. And I have to imagine that Benchley read this book or saw the movie, the Val Lewton movie based on it. I have to imagine that, you know, there was some inspiration there. Now, another thing you might not know about Jaws is Peter Benchley was the son of Robert Benchley. Robert Benchley was a humorist and film actor. He was in a lot of classic Hollywood films in the 30s and 40s. Really funny guy. Had his own series of short subjects where he would, you know, basically observational humor about everyday life. He was, I think he was the first observational humorist, where he would just take everyday life things and poke fun at them and, you know, make you realize that, you know, as annoying as this stuff is, it's pretty funny. So, but Benchley wasn't just Peter Benchley's father. He also provided the title Jaws. I forget, it was like, you know, Horror by Moonlight or something like that. Benchley's original title was Weak, and the publisher said, this title's terrible, come up with a new title. And so Benchley said to his dad, hey, I'm trying to think of a title for this book. And he describes the book to Robert Benchley, and Robert Benchley sits down and he just starts writing out titles, brainstorming, and he writes out 250 titles for this book, potential titles. And of course, being Benchley, some of them get kind of crazy. My favorite is, What's That Gnawing on My Leg? That was a suggested title for Jaws. But of course, in the list was Jaws. And he had, you know, Jaws of Death, Jaws of Horror, and then just Jaws. And Peter Benchley presented part of the list, not the sillier ones, presented part of the list to his publisher and the movie studio. And they all agreed Jaws was an awesome title, which it was. Okay, triple spin. It is not safe to go in the water yet. So Jason Shepard asks, suppose you were asked to submit a proposal for an ongoing Jaws comic. Is it feasible? And if so, how would you propose moving the story along? Yeah, I would go for that. I mean, a great white sharks. Obviously, it's not the same shark. I wouldn't make it direct sequels. It would just be shark stories. Just come up with interesting shark stories. I mean, it's obviously, you know, the genre still exists. There's 47 meters down. The excellent open water. I mean, shark-related horror continues to fascinate the public. Deep Blue Sea, which is a fantastic shark creature horror movie. So yeah, I mean, it'd be fun. It'd be fun coming up with interesting scenarios. Certainly more interesting than the actual Jaws sequels, which sadly suffered from trying to remake the first movie again. And that first movie is lightning in a bottle. You can't recreate it. It was a phenomenon of its time. And but yeah, it'd be fun. I would enjoy that. Somebody call me. Joe Tobin, your run on Punisher Warzone is what made me a comics fan. It's still my favorite run of the Punisher. My question is, why was the incredible Dixon, Romita Jr., Jansen team so short-lived? I know that you were all in high demand, but the book sold very well, and all three of you could have done very long runs throughout your careers. J.R. Klaus didn't even get to finish drawing the storyline of Rosalie Carbone and her 7 assassins. It was great to see you all reunite 2 years later for the brilliant Punisher Batman crossover, but a 2-year run or so with you, John, and Klaus on Warzone would have been incredible. Well, you hit the nail on the head. On demand. Or in demand. Johnny Romita Jr. was in demand. Klaus Janson was in demand. But mostly Johnny Romita Jr. was in demand. I mean, Klaus was welcome anywhere. One of the most beloved guys in comics. Everybody loves Klaus. And obviously his work is phenomenal. But Johnny Romita Jr. was white hot. And Marvel didn't even like him coming over to do the Punisher, because Marvel's never liked the Punisher. And they didn't want Johnny wasting his time on the Punisher. But Don Daly was persuasive, and Johnny really wanted to write the Punisher. And his main thing was that he wanted to really firmly establish that Frank Castle is of Italian descent, which I was cool with, right? And Johnny got involved in the writing process, unusual for an artist to, you know, we had meetings and went to lunches and stuff like that, and Johnny said what he expected from the series, and I appreciated all of that. I welcome any kind of input, you know, from the artist if they're, you know, engaged, and he certainly was. And I think that's the secret of why this arc was so successful, because we really were, you know, deep in the collaboration. There was a lot of thought, and there was a lot of ideas being thrown back and forth and accepted and rejected and all that stuff. So there was an energy. There was an energy behind it. I think that translated to the readers. Now, the first issue, it's the best-selling thing I've ever done in a single issue. 3.2 million copies. The royalty check was the biggest I'd ever seen when it came. Now, sales dropped off because it was a #1, and sales naturally drop off. And I think Johnny wanted to stay and do at least the first year, but he was under a lot of pressure from the X-Men office and a lot of pressure from the top at Marvel to stop Punisher, because Punisher Warzone sales had fallen below the average sale of an X-Men book, particularly that Johnny would have worked on. And so they were using economics on him, and they put a lot of pressure on him. And he admitted, he confessed, you know, they really want me off this book. They really want me over there. Now, he could have stood his ground, but, you know, he felt that he owed Marvel, or, you know, for whatever reason. And yeah, it's a pity he didn't stay for the whole year, but he didn't. And these things happen, and they drew him away. And these things happen, you know, when you're a writer. Now you say, well, I was in demand. Yeah, I wasn't really in demand at Marvel. In fact, when Don presented the idea of Punisher Warzone with Romita Jr. and Klaus and me, Tom DeFalco rejected the idea because he said that I wasn't hot enough. I couldn't carry a book like that. I wouldn't contribute anything to it. And Don had to show him the Diamond 100 and show him my sales on the different Robin projects that I worked on. And, you know, that I was very much a known property by this point. You know, maybe not super hot, but readers knew me. And I'd already written a whole bunch of Punisher, so Punisher readers certainly knew me. So it took a little convincing on Don's part, which I'm always grateful for. And we got to do, you know, this classic, at least the first initial 6-issue run is a classic. It's an enduring Punisher classic, and I'm so glad I was a part of it. But you know, it could not go on forever, and so that's when I began pushing for a Punisher Batman crossover with JR, and me, because I thought, well, that, you know, that's going to sell, and but that took a while. It took me probably 2 years to get that through. But again, grateful for that. Archie Goodwin was my editor on that one, and by that point, Tom didn't have nothing against Tom. I mean, he couldn't follow everybody's career. Nobody can. Just his impression of me was that I was a nobody. But by the time Batman Punisher came along, I wasn't a nobody anymore. I was a known quantity and associated with Punisher and Batman in a big way. So that's what happens. That's just the realities. Yeah, and I agree with you. It's a pity. And I wanted to come back. JR, and I wanted to do another story, which I still love to do someday. Probably will never get to do with the Punisher. I'll have to do it with another character. But a really cool high concept story that I won't describe here because Marvel will steal it. Ian Potash. Hi, Chuck. I just wanted to say Robin 4 had one of the best cliffhanger death traps in recent memory. The villain's plot of burying an armored van in concrete was so foolproof that it ironically almost became a death trap to its mastermind, Cluemaster and Robin. Their only salvation came when the rest of the gang dug it up early out of paranoia, condensing a lot of the plot here. It leads me to my question, how often should luck or coincidence drive the plot of a story? How do you know you've reached a satisfying balance that doesn't break the suspension of disbelief? Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this was, I gotta say, pretty cool idea, and I'll explain where the idea came from. It wasn't entirely my idea. It's going to be true confession time here on Ask Chuck Dixon. Anyway, yeah, in the story, Robin and Cluemaster, the idea was Cluemaster was going to steal this armored car, drop it into a ditch, fill the ditch with concrete, and then come back later when the heat was off. And pretty foolproof, pretty clever plan there, Cluemaster. But the problem was Robin kind of messed things up, and Robin and Cluemaster end up buried in the concrete, only to be rescued by the gang later as they opened it up early. And I actually called an ICU unit and asked about oxygen consumption, and I gave them the dimensions, the average dimensions of an armored car, and how long would an adolescent and adult male last? How much oxygen would they be? And they told me, they gave me the timeline of how many hours they would have until they both asphyxiated, which kind of cool. And of course, the drama, the dramatics between Robin and Cluemaster trapped together. What are they going to do? Kill each other? I mean, there was all kinds of things going on, and there was all kinds of stuff with the spoiler and all the rest of it. And it's so hard to come up with a good trap like this. As far as coincidence and whatever, you don't want the rule of thumb for coincidences is if you're going to have a coincidence in a story, have it occur early. The later a coincidence appears in your story, the more contrived it seems. We all have coincidences in life. We're on a vacation somewhere and run into somebody we haven't seen since elementary school. I mean, these things happen. But if you have them later in a story to resolve plot problems and the rest of it, it seems contrived and silly. Now, I worked pretty hard to give natural reasons why Cluemaster's gang would dig up the truck early and inadvertently rescue the Boy Wonder. But the thing with traps and the thing with suspense elements and cliffhangers and everything else, we want the hero to survive. We're afraid for them. That's the source of the suspense. And we want them to survive. So we want there to be a positive resolution to the event. And you see this over and over and over again, where characters are put in a tight corner, and you know, it's very entertaining and engaging and suspenseful, and then they're rescued or some opportunity allows them to escape, and we're glad for them. Okay, and at that point, if the creators have done their job, if I've done my job, you're not going to be thinking, yeah, what a deus ex machina, what a cop out, you know, what a quick resolution, what lazy writing that was. Because we're relying on you, the creators are relying on you, the reader, to be in the hero's corner and want to see them survive and be happy when they do, and hopefully not question how we went about that. So yes, the best way out of a trap is for the participants, the trappees, to figure a way out, a new clever way out. That's the best resolution for a trap, and I've done a few of them. They're not easy, folks. You know, Graham Nolan and I prided ourselves on a number of traps that we put Batman in our detective run, but they were hard to work out. The trap that I had Oliver Queen in that eventually killed him, that was a barn burner to figure out, at least for me. And so the ideal way, trap your character and have them figure their way out in a clever way that makes the reader go, wow, that was really clever of the hero, meaning really clever of the writer, and that's all great. But sometimes you just need to get the hero out of it. You know, sometimes that you've made the trap so good that there's no way out, and you have to have a deus ex machina or some outside resource take them out. Now it's confession time. Burying an armored car under concrete with some of the characters of a story in it is not original with me. I quote unquote borrowed it from a movie called Iron Angel. This was a series of Hong Kong action flicks that came out. This one came out in '87. They were vehicles for a martial artist named Moon Lee, and she was the Iron Angel, and they made several of these things, and they're all, primo 80s Hong Kong action. These are gonzo and crazy and fast-paced and just insane and wildly entertaining. So it's a great movie, and it was such a great trap. As soon as I saw it, I said, I'm borrowing this one. I'm gonna use this idea. Now my resolution and everything were different, but the core idea was the same. Armored car buried in concrete, the antagonist and protagonist trapped inside. But so yeah, I'm confessing. I gotta pay homage or due to the source material. So there you go. But those other traps that Graham and I came up with, those were all ours. So, and that Oliver Queen one, no, yeah, God, oh, don't remind me. Okay, Ace Mowick again. Or did they? No, we haven't had an Ace question. Anyway, Ace Mowick asks, have you or any of your colleagues ever been given a premise by one of your editors to flesh out? Then someone approached after it was released saying that the premise was originally their idea and it had been hijacked by the editor. If so, can you elaborate? Well, that's never happened. That exact scenario has never happened to me, but one similar, which I will relate in a second, has. I've had my ideas stolen by editors, and then the editor wrote the story themselves. I don't think it's ever happened to me that I haven't. I've had an idea taken by an editor, rejected by an editor as stupid, and then handed to another writer to write. And I've never had the opposite happen, where an editor said, what if you did this? And then another writer said, hey, that's my idea, he stole it. At least no one's come forward with that one. But I did definitely, early on in my comic career, have a story stolen by an editor. came up with an idea, and he said it was ridiculous and stupid, and the character would never do that, and I'm not going to be in the business very long. And then abracadabra, 6 months later, a comic appears with exactly my plot line, exactly my idea, written by the editor who said it was stupid. So anyway, flash forward, early 90s, I'm working on Batman, I'm working on Nightfall, I'm white hot, I'm at the peak of my career, basically. Everybody wants me to write their comics. There was a month where in the Diamond 100, I wrote 4 of the top 10 comics. So I was wizard hot there for about 5 minutes. Now, during that time, Joe Quesada approached me. Now, Joe Quesada was a freelancer, penciler, and like me at the time, white hot. Everybody wanted to work with Joe. Joe was working on the Azrael miniseries, and he's coming to the end of working on it. And I was in town for a Bat Summit. I got in town the day before. We were going to leave for the Bat Summit the next day. And somebody at the DC offices says, hey, Joe Quesada wanted to talk to you outside the offices. I'm like, well, that's odd. He said he wants to meet you, and I forget what hotel. So we met in this hotel lobby, and I meet Joe Quesada for the first time. And I compliment him on the Azrael thing. The art was looking terrific, and he was, overnight sensation, hugely popular guy. And he says, well, I have this idea that I want to work on, and I want you to write it. And the idea would be an Elseworlds, and it would be Batman if instead of in the United States, Bruce Wayne was a German during the time of the Third Reich, the rise of the Nazi Party and everything else. And Batman is like operating like as a resistance fighter against Hitler's goons. And I thought, well, yeah, that's a terrific idea, and I would love to write it. The only problem is that I know, because there's no secrets in comics, I know that Mike Barron pitched an idea just like that. And because Mike told me about it. And Quesada said, yeah, I was going to work on it with Mike, but I'd rather work on it with you. And I said, the problem here is that I'm friends with Mike, and I have a bottomless well of respect for Mike, and I would not screw him over like that. And Joe's attitude was, well, F him. I said, no, we're not effing him, because he pitched this first. He pitched it and brought you in. You don't have the right to tip him out of the boat. Now, if he decided he didn't want to work with you as an artist anymore, he would have that right, because he was the first guy in with the idea. This isn't your idea, Joe. This is Mike's idea. And I'm not going to take that away from Mike. As much as I would love to write this, and it would be a blast, and it would be hugely successful, I'm not going to screw Mike over. And I said, furthermore, even if I didn't know Mike, and he wasn't a friend, and I wouldn't screw over a fellow freelance writer, even if I didn't like him, I would. It's just unethical. And of course, unethical was, Joe Quesada's motto, because he did many more unethical things, and then he, of course, switched sides and became an editor and an editor-in-chief, and continued doing unethical things. This was not my first run-in with an unethical Joe Quesada. He once tried to convince me to violate my exclusive contract with DC and write some stuff for Marvel on the down low. And he would not tell anybody. And I said, well, the problem with that is, Joe, as I told you before in our first encounter, there's no secrets in comics. I mean, it would get out immediately that I was writing stuff for you on the down low, because you wouldn't be the only one who knew about it. You got to get the stuff drawn and inked and lettered and produced and colored. Everybody would know Chuck Dixon was writing stuff for Marvel while he was supposed to be on an exclusive with DC. So there you go. And when you asked me this question in email, I remember responding to you saying that I want to tell the story and I will name names because I'm going to name names. I generally don't diss other freelancers, but like I said, Joe became an editor. he stepped into the open, and editors are fair game. So there you go. Things like this happen all the time, unfortunately, but I won't participate. BrunoBookstore@gmail.com, BrunoBookstore@gmail.com. If you want more inside comics information, more stuff that'll blow your mind, more stuff that you can go down to a local comic shop and blow their minds, like you have some sort of, you've been some sort of fly on the wall in the comic book business. Anyway, if you have questions that you want answered in the realm of any of those things, drop me a line at BrunoBookstore@gmail.com, the most reliable way of getting a hold of me. And that's it for this week. I want to thank you for listening, watching, and I want to thank you for buying something big. If you do that, I think you'll enjoy it. Try out the first volume. All 4 volumes are in print right now, and I will hopefully see every last one of you down